Well, we're going to talk this morning some about dealing with religious differences. And as you know, particularly as the world's gotten, closer because of technology and so on, back when I was growing up, I just had to deal with the people in Barboursville, West Virginia, as to, what they thought. So since mostly everybody was Protestants, we didn't have super big differences. But then as the world has grown, we run into people that have very different perspectives on religion and what we do. If you don't think that's true, for those of you that flew in the 70s, did you ever stop and talk to a Hare Krishna? You found out how devout and so on some of those people were about what they were going to do. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about differences in religion. Man has always had some sort of religion that they dealt with. As anthropologists have gone back, they find in very remote tribes some sort of religion going on. But let me give you a definition as to what we might be using as a working definition this morning. It said religion can briefly be defined as a specific belief system about God or gods expressed through a code of conduct, ethics, forms of worship, and rituals. Religion includes social, ethical, and ceremonial elements combined with the belief in an unseen world and often a deity. And even as Steve was talking about this morning, we've seen where the Jews went to a calf, a golden calf, and so on. We tend to switch around on things, quite a bit. But as we look at it, there's probably four basic foundations of religion. You can get that next slide. One is got Abraham. I shouldn't have put that word on there. I never can get that. But it has to do with Abraham, so you can deal with that, which includes Judaism, Christianity, and even Islam, where they're looking at a supreme God, the only God. There are Indian religions, which are Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, those that deal with various intellectual and even, I guess, some gods involved there. You have the East Asian religions, which are based on Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism, Shinto, and then you have just basic folk religions, which deal with a particular people group or ethnicity, perhaps a tribe where we're dealing with remote groups and so on like that. But, in a world that's woven together by a variety of cultures and histories, we got to accept that we're going to be confronted with some diversity of faith, both in traditions and in beliefs. And it's going to be at the next slide there. It's going to be sometimes within the community. The community can be worldwide, or it can just be our own community, within our family, or within our church. But at times we look at this and say, well, but in our typical experience, we're typically going to be looking at probably Christianity. One of the surveys I looked at, if you can put that next slide up, one of the surveys I looked at, and it didn't have a date on it. I think this number might be a little bit smaller today, but it said that 62% of U.S. adults identify as Christians. Now, we got to think about, sometimes we apply that term Christian very narrowly, but that can be a variety of groups: evangelicals, mainland Protestants, Catholics, Mormons, all of them that tend to have Christ as a central part of some of their theology and so on. And then there's about 7% of the U.S. Identify with other religions, if you put that other slide up, which the major ones being Jewish, Muslim, or various other types of things, but Jewish and Muslims being the biggest. That's about 7% roundabout. Then we've got the next group, which says that 29% of U.S. adults identify as being religiously unaffiliated. And I think in more recent surveys I've seen that number may be a good bit larger. But that includes people that claim to be atheist, perhaps agnostic. But the one that's growing quite a bit is nothing in particular. And this group of people will be those folks that, maybe they believe in God, maybe they don't, not agnostic in nature, but they just say, okay, yeah, religion's a good thing, but I just choose not to participate. And that has tended to be a growing group of people within the United States. But when you look at that, the group that, as I said earlier, that we're most likely to deal with are people in that Christianity category and some of the different beliefs that may exist there. Next slide, please. This was a surprising number to me. Said that there's estimated to be 50,000 Christian denominations. That's a staggering number, isn't it? 50,000. Whenever you think after Jesus' resurrection, we started with one, and now we're up to 50,000 different varieties of how people choose to serve God. So you can think of a denomination then as being a distinct family of churches, perhaps within a larger global family of God, that groups that perhaps share a special connection or some special way of doing things and differentiate themselves. And if you look at how did these denominations come into being, why do we have all these different ones? There's several reasons for that. The one you would expect would be a theological doctrine, but even theological doctrine can be broken down into some of the things we have listed here. Some people vary as to view who Jesus is. I find that a little surprising. I guess that's why we've got differences. But some people, can't fit Jesus being divine and human at the same time. They just want, and that was one of the problems as we read in the New Testament. Some people had as well. So, that kind of differentiates in the groups. The one we run into a lot is what's salvation? How do you get salvation? How are we saved? But differences in the basis of what part does faith play in that? What sort of things do we apply God's grace to? Those types of things relative to salvation. The one I think probably when we talk about challenges, religious differences, that's the most is the Bible versus tradition. Tradition, I think, has become a very damaging thing to religion because we ease into those things that say, well, this is a good idea, and then over time, because we've always done it, that must be something that we have to do. But so we deal with tradition and kind of place some special authority to tradition as opposed to the Bible. There's sacraments. Mike has, I know in years past, has talked about. There's a lot of things that we look at that have become sacraments to us. The Lord's Supper being one of them. That's a good thing to do. Jesus told us to do it, but sometimes, perhaps a little bit too much is placed on that as far as some of the denominations are concerned. And there's always been major splits. Historically, listing a few of them, one that I was not familiar with the name was called the Great Schism, which was in 1054, which divided the church into East and West. So there started to be some big differences in religion at that point in time. The Protestant Reformation in the 16th century was another one, and then within the history of our own church, the Restoration movement caused some differences in the way people looked at religion as well that our church came out of. And then today, we see a lot of other influences, political influences coming in, social influences coming in. And Jerry's, I think, talked last week, and we talked at other times about some of the things as to how we want to put politics into the church. And if you read the news, there's some major denominations that are experiencing some real difficulties over political and social issues. Church leadership is another thing that tends to bring about some differences in opinion as to within our religion as to where authority comes from. So in other words, should you be governed with elders or deacons, or what role does the pastor or the preacher play? In the Catholics, what's the role of the Pope and so on. So those things are all different, and they come about because of some of the what you would call hermeneutics as to how people tend to want to look at the Bible and understand the Bible and what they're needing to do. So we look at all these things that can cause us differences and challenges, but we kind of want to look back and say, what did God want? And I think one of the more significant scriptures to me, the one that's most personal to me, is in John 17. I can't remember if we got that up there or not, but if you remember, this was before Jesus was going to be in the garden and address where he's proceeded into the crucifixion as events played out. This was a prayer that he prayed. And he says, "My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I and them and you and me, so that they may be brought to complete unity." And then the really significant part of that is, "Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me." And I don't know about you, but that last sentence, is perhaps the most significant. I'm awed by the fact that to think that Jesus was praying for me, and I assume some of you guys too, in this. That was a joke. But the fact that unity is one of the things that Jesus says, that's how people are going to know that I was sent here by God. They're going to know who I am and to believe what I am. So that's important. 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 10 also says, "I appeal to you, brothers, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree, and that there be no divisions among you, and that you be united in the same mind and in the same judgment." Philippians 2 talks and encourages believers to be like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. So all those things pointing towards how important unity is for us to at least strive for unity. And I said sometimes we don't think about all the challenges that were there in the Old Testament, but clearly they were. And in Psalms 133 verse 1, it says, "How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity." How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. So you can see that the Bible gives some serious thought to pursuing unity. Excuse me. But it also gives us some serious warnings about attitudes and actions that cause unnecessary divisions. Sometimes, as the saying goes, we can make a mountain out of a molehill. Sometimes there's those things that which we'll talk about a little bit later that aren't super important, but are differences we have, and we raise them to a level that then it becomes a problem between believers. And the Bible speaks to that too. In Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 through 9, Paul was amazed that the Galatian believers, were being so quickly turning to a different gospel, which he said is really no gospel at all. And he talks about in those verses that we need to be true to doctrinal purity, especially about the core message of salvation, because it's so important and might mean separating from those who twist it. So even though we try and strive for unity, we try to come together, we try to understand one another, there can come a time, where we just need to separate from that and don't, continue to push the issue. Romans, the 16th chapter, verse 17, Paul urges believers to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you have been taught and avoid them. Titus chapter 3 says, this verse advises believers to warn a divisive person once and then warn them a second time, and after that have nothing to do with them. So this is all speaking to, how do we deal with people that have different points of view, that with the divisions, you can only take it to a point. In Galatians 5, he says, lists dissensions and divisions among those who work as being works of the flesh, warning that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. So, creating division, maybe while striving for unity is something that we have to be careful about. It's kind of interesting when you look at these cautions and these warnings, how often the things have been done in the name of God. We look at some of those things I mentioned in history, how people were killed, and even today, where there's differences in religion and so on. I forget what the statistic. I saw a statistic. I don't know if it's right or not. That every 6 or 8 minutes, something like that, a Christian's being killed around the world, and that's primarily because of differences in religious thought. So there's been wars, persecution, broken families, shattered communities. All those things have perhaps been done because people were invoking the name of God and what they were doing. So do we as people seeking truth and goodness then engage with those whose beliefs differ from our own? That's the question we want to look at. Now, what does it mean to truly love our neighbor when their way of worship, their language of faith is not the same as ours? After all, we are walking in this life together. So let's look then at how we go about navigating religious differences and what the Bible has to say about that. Proverbs chapter 15, I think we've got that. Yeah, it says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise adorns knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly. The heart of the righteous weighs its answers, but the mouth of the wicked gushes evil. So, again, the Bible is telling us that, we'll talk a bit more about it a little bit, and Jerry talked about it previously, we got to watch how it is we approach people and how we go about, trying to gain some understanding. Paul had to, write to people to talk about how to handle religious differences. And I don't have all this up on screen, but if you look at Romans in the 14th and 15th chapter, he gives a list of attributes or things that we need to do as we're trying to deal with one another and differences we might have. He talks about accepting the weak without judgment. He talks about giving thanks for them, that we have the ability to talk to them, about acting in love, reminding them that God is pleasing God is what is important. And I think that's one of the things sometimes we forget about. We want to win an argument, but what we really need to do is understand what God wants and how we can please Him and what we're doing. And building people up. Tearing people down never goes very far in trying to resolve differences or come to some type of common understanding. If we look at how Jesus dealt with people, and this is one of the places, I don't know how many of you have watched any of the videos of The Chosen, but I highly recommend it if you haven't looked at them. And I haven't seen anything on them in the 4 seasons that we've watched that seem to be contrary to the Bible, but of course they take a bit of a license in reflecting how they think Jesus' personality was, and it's given me a time to think about that a good bit, because sometimes we just have the view of Jesus as we see him in the paintings and so on, being all pious and so on. But, for example, one of the things I never thought about was in his travels, he and his disciples are all the time picking up their tents and building fires and so on. They were out camping, most of the time that they were traveling around. One of the things I hadn't thought about, but just the way they portrayed Jesus and his interactions with people, I think is a little different, because sometimes we focus upon the conflict that he had with the Pharisees and so on, but don't think about how he's dealing with the common person as he walked around. But some of the things that one of the articles I was reading that kind of detailed how they felt like Jesus dealt with people said he was impressed with faith, and they pointed to examples being the centurion and the woman that touched his garment, commenting on their faith. He was impressed by love. One of the examples was he was impressed with the men who lowered their friend down through the roof, because they loved their friend, but had faith that Jesus could heal them. He was impressed with honest seekers. The rich young ruler and the blind man Bartimaeus was two that he might be an example of that. And he was impressed with those who do good. His disciples at one time, came to him and said, well, those people over there are doing things, but, they're not one of those. And he says, well, they're doing good. And kind of one of those things, if they're not against us, if they'd be for us. And he was also impressed with the humble and the penitent. Even the thief on the cross and the centurion at his crucifixion, were people that showed penance. So then looking at how Jesus engaged people, then how should we follow his example? As I said, remember Jerry talked, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, about how do we say it? How do we approach people? So, we need to stay aware of our mannerisms, our aggressiveness, our attitude towards people when we're discussing differences. And that can be reflected in how you react to what they say, their body language, facial expressions. All those things go into, how people might react to you as you're trying to understand where they are. Show respect for the other person. Respect is a very important thing to us, isn't it? If people sense that you're not respecting them as a person, you're not going to be respecting their views and so on like that, that discussion's not going to go very far. Another thing we need to do is walk the talk. We're not going to be very effective with people if we're telling them one thing, well, we believe this and this and this and this, and then they see us out someplace doing something different or not following what it is we say is truth. See, we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. That comes up in, and if you love your neighbor, you want the best for them, so you're trying to present to them the truth in a way that that they're going to accept it. One of the articles I was reading mentioned that, love your neighbor as yourself, but it said there's no footnote that says that they have to agree with you. And I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but, we're to love our enemies. There's all sorts of people we're supposed to love. We're not supposed to put all these little qualifiers and footnotes around everything. Seek to understand. Regardless of whether we're talking about religious differences or just life differences, that's an important thing. Sometimes we make an assumption as to why somebody believes something or why they act the way they do. But we really don't know until we really seek to understand. Ask questions. Someone presents a point of view that's different of yours. It's probably prudent to ask the question, well, why do you believe that? Why is that? What's your basis for that? Seek to understand where they're coming from in that position. Likewise, we should be ready to be able to answer those why questions as well. Find common ground. Oftentimes that's the problem we have, and we just want to talk about differences. And what does that do in our conversations if we want to talk about differences? Well, that's generally going to start the conversation off in a negative tone. in a negative way because, okay, well, we don't agree on this, and then chances are if people have had a position for a long time or a belief for a long time, it's not going to be a one conversation thing. You have to come to understand, well, how did we get there? And I think particularly when you look at these 50,000 denominations that they listed, I think even if, Jerry, what's the book with all the list of Church of Christ? Where the Church Meets. If you get a copy of that, it hasn't been published, I think, for a few years, but I don't know how many different Churches of Christ are listed in there. I know I had one experience with that back years ago. I got transferred to Columbia, Tennessee, at a plant there, and I don't know how it got around the plant so quickly that I went to the Church of Christ. Of course, at that time in the 70s, I think St. Louis County had 7 Churches of Christ, and Columbia, Tennessee, which was a town of 10 or 12,000 people, had 7 Churches of Christ. Many of them were a result of differences. But anyway, one fellow walked in my office, one morning and said, "I understand you're a member of the Church of Christ." I said, "Yeah, I am." And he says, "Well, what do you think about widows and orphans?" Now, I had never been exposed to this difference in thinking, and I just kind of looked at him blindly, and I says, "Well, I guess I feel sorry for them," which was not exactly, for those of you who don't know, I haven't heard of this recently, but there was a fairly large group of people, particularly in the South, that were Church of Christ that were called anti-churches because they were against anti-orphanages and things like that. They felt like you needed to take them in your home and so on. But so even little things like that can occur. The Bible also cautions us against being a stumbling block. If you look at Colossians, the 4th chapter, it says, "Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." Romans, the 14th chapter, says, "Except the one whose faith is weak, without quarreling over disputable matters. You then, why do you judge your brother and sister?" At the root of some of this, this aspect of judging comes into that, and that's one of the things I think we need to remember when we're trying to deal with religious differences. We're not to judge, God is, and I think the other thing that this particular scripture points out says, don't quarrel over disputable matters. That's one of the things we also need to keep in mind. They had that in the early church, matters that there were differences of opinion, or there were things that were disputable. But if you spend time quarreling over those things, we're not focusing upon, what we truly can do for God. Then in Romans, the 14th chapter, verse 10, it says, "Or why do you treat them with contempt? For we will all stand before God's judgment seat." Again, speaking to judgment. So you kind of look at it and say, what, rather than assuming that we alone possess the truth, we truly listened to other people, to the stories and experiences of others. Have that humility. Because you pose the question, I think most of us will admit that through the years we've kind of changed our thinking about some things. Hopefully we've grown wiser. We've gotten into the Word more. We understand things a little more. We start to realize that maybe some of the things that we held to so strongly in prior days were just things that were handed by somebody else, not even a scriptural basis for it that we need to really look at. What is the basis for our belief? So then, in every instance, disagreement really isn't of the same importance. And I want to emphasize, we need to listen. Maybe we can compromise, but the thing we can't compromise is on matters of salvation and on the truth. 2 Timothy, the 2nd chapter, says, "Don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments." Never thought about the word stupid being in the Bible, but there it is. Don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments, because they produce quarrels. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but must be kind to everyone, able to teach, and not resentful. It goes on then to say, opponents must be greatly instructed in the hope that God will grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth, and that they will come to their senses. And listen to this, and escape the trap of the devil who has taken them captive to do his will. And I think that's one of the things that we need to remember about these quarrelsome and disputable matters at times. You know, some of those are put in place, and they put us in a mode of wanting to argue and be quarreling about that, because what does that do? That kind of separates us from looking at the Word and really understanding what God wants for us to do. One of the things about discussing these sorts of things, it can deepen our own faith as well. Sometimes we just, kind of go along and say, I believe this or I believe that. And we, as I mentioned, we want to challenge other people with asking why. We don't ask ourselves the question of why do I believe this or that. I know in my life, as I changed to the Church of Christ, that was one of the things that I had to. There were some basic things in the denomination I was attending that I had to question. Well, do I really believe that, or do I believe what the Church of Christ is teaching? So we need to be able to address that. And there's so many things that can unite us if we'll let it. We at times we've kind of tried to separate ourselves from other denominations, and these are people who also believe in Jesus Christ, who want to do good, who want to help people, and so on. And those are the common things that we have, but we kind of tried to separate from that. And I think we've tried to change our approach to that a little bit here with some of the community things that we're having that does good for other people, because that does open doors. And working together then is something that's going to take down some of the barriers that may exist if we keep that separation going. Romans, the 12th chapter, again says, "Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. And if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." And why is that important? Well, our role in God's mission is to get the gospel to people, to get them to understand it. How are we going to do that if we separate ourselves and we get to where people don't even want to talk to us? We can't approach them and have them respect anything we say. So it's very important, I think, that we look at those religious differences, how we deal with them. So kind of in summary then, what's some advice about dealing with it? Well, first of all, respect people. They are God's creation as well. They have minds and so on. We can help them grow, and they can help us grow in many instances. They acknowledge right for others' belief. They do have a right to think differently than us. Focus on shared values, love, kindness, respect, those sorts of things. Be prepared to present biblical truth in doctrine. Again, be careful that we don't get so wrapped up in those things that are disputable that we forget to talk about what is the doctrine, because that is the thing that we can't compromise, the doctrine of salvation. Remember, you are not the judge. God is. There may be a point where you have to walk away, but don't burn bridges. Beliefs and hearts do change, and I think that's a very important part. We can burn bridges with people. I know I've known some people that, very devout Christians burn bridges with them by telling them, well, if you don't do this, you're going to hell. And it was on, if you don't attend church on Wednesday nights, you're going to go to hell. That person never has been back to church again, from that. So we've got to be careful in dealing with what we believe to be very strong, that we don't burn bridges to where people don't listen to the gospel, don't study. I've probably gone a little bit over time, but we do have classes if you want to discuss this even further. Brian's going to come up and sing a song. The elders will be around. Jerry mentioned we are a praying church. We believe in prayer very strongly, so if you have a prayer request, a prayer need, you can contact go to one of those people or go back to their prayer room, and your concerns will be shared in prayer. Thank you.